What if I told you that the way that you've been thinking about communication may not be enough? Well, Jesus had a way of shaking people out of their assumptions, and he did it with such powerful speaking techniques that you can use too. So stay tuned if you want to learn how to speak like Jesus in this continuing series. Hi, I'm Lisa Vanderkwaak, and I'm a certified speaking coach, and I help kingdom entrepreneurs turn their unique signature talk into streams of income that impact lives and have a transformational legacy every time they speak. Have you ever felt like your message wasn't truly landing on your audience? Maybe you were sharing powerful truths, but people aren't really engaging or making the changes that you hope for. This is a common frustration of speakers, especially emerging speakers or unskilled speakers. Maybe you're struggling to position yourself as a credible authority and your audience just isn't responding the way that you want to. Does that sound familiar? Well, Jesus faced a similar challenge. He was speaking to people who had been taught the same beliefs for generations, and they weren't getting it. They thought they knew what was right, but instead of just telling them they were wrong, Jesus used powerful speaking techniques that you're going to want to listen in and apply to your speaking if you want to become a transformational communicator. All right. So today's passage is based on today's episode, I should say, of the Speak Like Jesus series, is a continuation of the Matthew 17 passage, verses 5, verses 17 to 48. We're just going to go a little bit around that again. I know there's a previous video I put out on this, but there's so much in this that I want to unpack, and I want to make sure you get it because these are powerful techniques to help you not only engage your audience, but to go deeper, to bring about transformational shifts. Let me bring up the passage for you so that you can be reminded of exactly which one I'm talking about. All right, so this is the one where Jesus starts to talk about. He talks about the law and the contrast of the law. And he says, if you think that I've come to set aside the law of Moses, the writings of prophets, you're mistaken. I have actually come to bring all of this into fulfillment. Indeed, I assure you, as long as heaven and earth endures, not even the smallest detail of the law will be done away with until its purpose is complete. And then he goes on to do a number of things, contrasting the old way of doing something to the new way, the old covenant to the new covenant. And that is really a technique in and of itself that helps you to bring a deeper understanding to your listeners so that they begin to see where they need to shift, maybe where they're stuck in an old mindset. Because really, that's what transformation is about, helping people to shift into new ways of thinking, new ways of acting, new ways of living. So this audience that Jesus was speaking to thought they knew what was right. But instead of just telling them that they were wrong, which a lot of speakers do, they just tell, and especially if you're used to preaching in the old traditional way or even old traditional way of speaking, you may be used to telling people what's wrong. But do you want to learn a more effective way to help people to shift? Because I don't know about you, but have you ever had someone tell you what was wrong and you just put your defenses up and said, "Hey, who are you?" and you resisted at all costs? Well, that's what's going to happen to your audience if you continually tell them they're wrong or where they're wrong. But Jesus used techniques so that he was telling them, but it wasn't telling them directly, but it was helping them to come to the conclusions and for them to make a decision what they're going to do about it. And the techniques that he used was contrast, persuasion, and deep reflection to challenge their thinking and lead them into transformation if they truly wanted it. In Matthew 5, verses 17 to 48, Jesus repeatedly uses contrast. Why? To shake up their beliefs, to help them to see where they're thinking and a new way of thinking. If they continue to think in this way, their old way, what it's going to lead to, where it's going to lead them to, what are the results they can expect. Or if they desire and make a step to shift into new ways of thinking, what that outcome will be, what they can expect will be the future for them. And he said things like, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." So he contrasted, "You've heard it said from your ancestors, from Moses, but I say to you." What is he doing here? Well, he's throwing rocks at outdated belief systems, positioning himself as a voice of authority and making his audience rethink everything they thought they knew. Because isn't that where transformation really happens? Is when we decide to put aside something that we thought we knew or something that we thought was truth or that was working, and choose to make a change and adopt something and embrace change to adopt a new way of thinking or a new way of acting. Now, some of the techniques that Jesus used to create this deep impact were contrast, as I mentioned, but also something that my mentor calls the edge formula. This is something I was taught in my training to become a certified speaking coach. And this was coined by Craig Valentine. It's called the edge formula. I won't go into all the details of what it is, but the core point of this formula is that it helps you to tap into the core motivations of your audience. It's like, what are the top motivators that people in the audience have, and how can you speak to each one of those motivators so that they are inspired and motivated to act, right? Because again, information will only take them so far. If they don't act upon the information and implement it in some way or take action to bring about an activation, then the transformation won't happen and they won't get the results. So you want to encourage them and invite them to take action, but to give them a reason to do it. And that's where the tapping into the motivators is really key. In this passage of scripture, Jesus contrasts the wise and the foolish, as well as the pure and the hypocritical. He contrasts the righteous and the unrighteous to highlight what people want to attain and what they want to avoid. He tapped into two of those motivators. People are motivated sometimes by what they want to avoid, by a bad thing happening, or what they want to attain or what they want to achieve. Another way of putting it is moving away from pain and moving towards pleasure. And in contrasting these areas, the wise and the foolish, the pure and the hypocritical, the righteous and the unrighteous, Jesus highlights motivations, and how they were motivated will determine their action. He taps into their desire to be highly esteemed in the kingdom of heaven. They want to be seen as someone who is important, someone who's respected, someone who's seen as integrity. And so in his language, he tapped into their desire to be highly esteemed in the kingdom of heaven by even contrasting them with people who were not as esteemed. And they're like, "Oh, I don't want to be like a tax collector." And it also helped them to see their fear of being least esteemed, to move away from being least esteemed. The fear tapped into that motivation of fear of being least esteemed. This is a powerful persuasion technique because it helps people to make a decision internally based on what they understand and believe to be the outcomes if they choose to believe, they choose to follow a certain path or to walk in a certain way of thinking. And so they internally make that choice. In doing this, Jesus is both challenging authority and common beliefs. He doesn't just deliver new ideas. Have you noticed that? Jesus doesn't just deliver new ideas. He disrupts old ones. He calls out the Pharisees. He exposes double standards, and he challenges their comfort zone. When he says, "Your ancestors taught, but I say to you," he forces people to rethink their assumptions, and acknowledge that maybe their current way of thinking isn't enough. This is so powerful as a speaker for you and I to do as well. The other thing is, why it's so important not just to tell your audience is that rather than just telling them what to do, Jesus asks questions like, what reward? Let me just try that again. Seem to be a little marbles in my mouth there. He asks a question like, what reward do you deserve if you only love those who love you? Again, he's making them think. Why is this important as a speaker that you make your audience members think? Now, you might want to write this one down. It's because without reflection, there is no connection. And public speaking is not so much about the content, it's about how that content connects with your audience in deeper, more meaningful ways. So you need to be able to and strategically help your audience members think about by reflecting personally on the content. When people come to their own conclusion on their own, they own it. I'm going to say that again. When people come to a conclusion on their own, they own it. One of my mentors says it like this. He says, if I say it, you may doubt it. But if you say it, you believe it. Even if you say it internally in your conclusion and you come to that conclusion on your own, then you're going to believe it more than just me telling you, right? I'm sure you've experienced this in your life. I know I have. Jesus knew his audience deeply, and he was able to tap into two core motivators, as I mentioned. One was why they wanted, the things that they wanted to avoid and what they wanted to attain. These are powerful, powerful motivators that can help you as well. Because with this particular audience, he knew that they wanted to attain righteousness, the kingdom of heaven, being esteemed by God. And those who were motivated by this would perk up and listen. Ooh, how do I attain that? And then there were some who wanted to avoid being seen as a tax collector, being a hypocrite, or being seen as an outsider. And if that was their motivation, they would perk up and listen. He even said, he who has ears to hear, let him listen and obey. Now, what has this got to do with you? When you use these techniques in your speaking, you see shifts. Everything shifts. Instead of just giving information, you create an emotional connection. You position yourself as a credible authority, and you move your audience toward transformation that they want and not just taking in data. So imagine standing on a stage and having your audience completely locked in, reflecting deeply and making real changes because of what they hear you saying. That's the power of being skilled at using techniques such as contrast, persuasive language, and strategic messaging. So if you want to learn how to structure your message like Jesus did and to use these same techniques to challenge beliefs, create deeper engagement, and position yourself as a trusted authority, I invite you to grab my Speaker Impact Toolkit for free at speakergift.com. And inside, you'll get speaking tips that will help you craft and deliver messages that truly transform lives. Because it's not enough just to speak. You need to speak with impact so that lives will be transformed. Look forward to connecting with you real soon, and tune in to the next video where we continue the series to speak like Jesus. As you're listening today, you may have felt prompted to say, I want to become a much better speaker. I want to be able to speak with confidence, clarity, and transformational impact. I want to invite you to check out the link in the comments below, wherever you're listening to this. Your voice is an instrument of transformation and needs to be heard, so let it be heard.